Hello Kipsters and welcome back. I'm not going to be played as a fool again. And during our first IA window, many of you said my hair looked crazy, which is why I'm going to wear my fancy fedora to look extra cool. Alright, so let's dive in. Video number 4, negative number lines. This is an area that I've been super proud of you guys. You've shown a ton of growth from our first FSAs on this topic to now. I know there's certain Kipsters that have really improved, which makes me very proud. So let's make sure we're going to get this to mastery 100%. Alright, it says use a number line below to answer the 2 questions below. We see this number line. It only has 8 and negative 8 filled in. Then it says place and label each rational number in the appropriate place along the number line. So the first thing that we want to do with the number line is make sure that it's clearly labeled. So I'm going to make sure that this is our positive side. It's positive because it's to the right of 0. It's larger than 0. And then I'm going to move to the left of 0. We know that numbers to the left of 0 are going to be smaller than 0. And these are our negative numbers. It reminds me of our opposite land that we learned about a long time ago. Alright, now once I finish numbering this, it's going to make it a lot easier for me to actually place these numbers here. Okay, so the first number that I'm going to put on my number line is these 2 weird signs. We need to remember that these little lines here and here stand for the absolute value. Absolute value just says how far a number is away from 0. And absolute value is always positive because we're just saying our distance, and our distance is always positive. It's kind of weird to have negative as a distance because distance you always think is like a positive thing. So I have the absolute value of negative 3.5, which is really saying how far is negative 3.5 away from 0? Well, it's going to be 3.5 away from 0. So when we think about that, I always like to do my little dance. The absolute value, drop the negative. Absolute value, drop the negative. So we're getting rid of that negative sign when we're in the absolute value bars. So this sign right here is going to be on the positive side. So this is really going to become 3.5 and positive. So I'm starting at 0, positive is to the right, and I'm going to count 1, 2, 3. I know 3.5 is in between 3 and then the number after 3, which is going to be 4. Decimal point 5 is always in the middle, so I'm going to make a perfect line right down the middle, try to be as precise as possible, 3.5. And I know that you guys can do even better than me. On the computer, it's kind of hard to draw, so I know you guys can impress me. Okay? Let's look at our next one. It says negative 2.5. Well, I know that negative 2 is going to be to the left of 0, and then I know it's a half. A half is just like a 0.5. Half is always down the middle. So I'm going to start at 0. I'm going to count negative 1, negative 2. Some Kipsters might want to put this here, but that's in between negative 1 and negative 2. That would actually be negative 1.5. But I want it to be in between negative 2 and negative 3. So I'm going to put this one right there. And that's going to be negative 2 and a half. It's right down the middle because if I take a half, I'm just cutting it in half or down the middle. Let's look at our next one. Our next is negative 6.8. Again, it's negative, which means it's to the left of 0. This decimal is 0.8. I know that I want to always have a key decimal in line in terms of the middle, which is 0.5. So 0.8 means it's actually more negative because it's actually more negative than negative 6.5. So it's going to be closer to negative 7. So if I think about it, this is only 2/10 away from the next negative number, and it's 8/10 away from 6. So it helps to think that this number is actually pretty close to being negative 7. So when I look at my number line, I'm starting at 0, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6, and then I'm going to be really close to 7. I'm going to put it right about there to be as precise as possible. Okay? That's going to be negative 6.8. Okay? Notice how I'm using my line and then I can write the number above. The line is going to help us be really precise. Now let's look at our next one, which is negative 0.2. This one is also going to be to the left of 0, but it's going to be pretty close to 0. And that's pretty obvious because this number is a 0. My whole number is 0, which means that it's really close to my middle point or my starting point where that 0 portal is in terms of dividing up positive land and negative land. So this one is going to be, if I imagine 0, and it's 0.2. Remember, decimals are really important. We always want to think about 0.5 as that spot in the middle. This is less than 0.5, so it's going to actually be closer to the 0 than it is to the 1. So if I imagine this as negative 0.5, 0.2 is going to be about there. So I'm going to write negative 0.2. And that should make sense because the 0 is in between the 0 and the negative 1. On your FSA, some Kipsters put their spot right here. But this is not negative 0.2, this is negative 1.2 because it's in between negative 1 and negative 2. So we have to be really careful there. Woo, we're almost done. Last one, we're going to look at 4 3/4. Okay, 4 3/4. Let's check it out. This is positive, yay, so it's going to be on the right-hand side. It's bigger than 0. I'm going to count by my ones. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I think about 4 3/4, it's almost like 4 3/4. If I think about the last video, it's like 4.75. That's more than the halfway point, which means it's only a quarter away from being the next whole number. So it's going to be between 4 and 5. Here would be the halfway point, or 2/4, or 1/2. So 3/4 is going to be about here. This is 4 3/4. Okay? And that's where our 5 points should be. I can check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm actually going to go back and make sure I did this correct. The absolute value of negative 3.5 is 3.5. Boom. Negative 2.5 is going to be right here. Fantastic. Negative 6.8 is really close to negative 7. Negative 0.2 is going to be close to 0, but on the left side of 0. And then 4 3/4 is pretty close to 5. Awesome. Feeling good about where I placed my numbers on the number line and feeling super precise. Yes. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is order my numbers from greatest to least. So this is really important because it literally says greatest to least. So I want to make sure I really understand that, greatest to least. That means the most positive number to the most negative number. If I'm going from greatest to least, I'm actually going from the right and moving to the left. Wow, that was a horrible arrow. So I'm going from the right and moving to the left if I'm going from the biggest to the smallest. So my biggest number over here is 4 3/4. I'm going to use my greater than sign. I like to say that this number is bigger than the next number. So I do 2 dots and then 1 and connect them. You can think about Pac-Man eating the bigger number. You can think about these guys pointing at the smallest number. But greatest to least are always going to have our greater than sign. So 4 3/4 is greater than 3.5. I'm literally just going in order since I just did all that hard work, which is greater than negative 0.2. That should make sense because a positive number will always be greater than a negative number, which is greater than negative 2.5. And now we're going to have our most left or our least number. Most left means it's furthest in negative land, so that's going to be greater than negative 6.8. If I check, I can see that I went from the right to the left. 4 3/4 is here. The leftmost number, negative 6.8, is over here. You can think about all these arrows pointing at this little guy. They're making fun of him, saying, "You're the least." And I'm going from the biggest to the smallest number. Right now, Kipsters, you're going to do the next 2 problems. Make sure you're being really precise. I'm going to actually grade your number lines by hand, but you will be able to choose A, B, C, or D for part B when you actually order the numbers with our greater than or less than signs. Make sure you're going in the correct order. You got this. Ow!